bourgeoisie produces, above all, art zone. Grave diggers.
Hi everyone,
Hey folks, we're back.
it's Erin from Seoul.
And it's Amr from Toronto, and I lost all of my hair, so there's that. But I'm here to record, hair or no hair.
Yay! Well, not about you losing your hair, but you being with us, of course.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's all cosmetic. It's gonna come back. But, just letting you listeners know that hair or no hair, I'm here to record for you, our cult.
Yeah, well, you sound just as suave bald, Amr.
Thank you.
Chances are, most of your closet probably consists of ready-made garments, clothing manufactured en masse to fit most people. In other words, you go to the store, find something that you like, look through the rack or pile to find your size, and purchase. Except for tailor-made garments just for you and secondhand or thrifted items, this is how most of us probably acquire our clothing. And most of us probably know that the conditions in these factories are less than ideal. International corporations like Nike and Gap have repeatedly been caught exploiting workers in countries like Bangladesh and Vietnam, and having them work long hours with little pay in factories with very few safety precautions. In some cases, they have even used child labor. On April 24, 2013, a garment factory in Dhaka, Bangladesh collapsed, killing 1,134 people and injuring about 2,500 more. The incident is considered the deadliest structural failure accident in modern human history. But it was more than a simple mistake on the part of the building's architects or construction workers. It resulted from capitalist greed, valuing profits over workers' safety. Today, we're going to tell you the story of the Rana Plaza collapse. Let's begin by looking at the garment industry in Bangladesh. Bangladesh is one of the world's largest ready-made garment producers, jumping on the trend as it took off, especially in the 80s and 90s. Labor in Bangladesh is so cheap that even China, a country known for its inexpensive exports, has been outsourcing work to Bangladesh. The population of Bangladesh in 2018 was 161.4 million people. If you cut out the city-state and small island countries like Monaco, Hong Kong, and Bahrain, it's the most densely populated country on Earth.
Hey, we got mentioned. That's nice.
Yeah, very densely populated over there.
Oh, yeah. Oh, absolutely. It's awful.
So all of those people are competing for jobs, and many, especially women, find them in the ready-made garment industry.
Yeah, so keep in mind that a lot of developing countries, especially in Asia, their economies rely largely on exports. So you have situations where raw materials are brought in, and out of the country come things like shoes, garments, electronics, so on and so forth, to be used, in the developing world, as well as the developed world. But the issue here is that austerity programs in many of these countries would end up pushing young people to work dangerous jobs in these factories to make ends meet, because the state's social safety net is pretty much torn apart by IMF recommendations. And traditional economies like agriculture are destroyed as, large landowners accumulate more and more land.
These are very structural problems that we're discussing.
Yeah.
While Bangladesh has labor laws, it's difficult to form a union in the country, and factory owners have been known to resort to methods like violence and intimidation to stop workers from unionizing. I actually checked the labels on the clothes I'm wearing right now, and my t-shirt was made in the USA, which surprised me, but that doesn't mean all of the materials were sourced from the USA. It just means that the final shirt was stitched together in the USA. And my sweatpants were made in the Philippines, but I'm pretty sure I have plenty of garments that were manufactured in Bangladesh.
Yeah, I just checked, and my t-shirt was made in Vietnam, and my shorts was made in Bangladesh, so there's that.
So the building that we're discussing today, Rana Plaza, was built in Dhaka, Bangladesh in 2006 by a man called Sohail Rana. Dhaka is Bangladesh's capital and the most densely populated area. The building's lower floors housed shops and offices, while garment factories occupied the upper floors. Crucially, these upper floors should never have been built, especially not for factories. The building's architect emphasized that it was for commercial, not industrial use. The weight and movement of heavy machinery could damage the entire structure. If you look at images of Rana Plaza before the collapse, you can clearly see that the upper 3 or 4 floors of the building were added to the original structure. Like, imagine if someone just built 5 factories on top of your apartment building, how unpleasant that would be.
Yeah, and I think it also brings to mind, at least for me, you know how there's a lot of, I don't want to say propaganda because that's too strong of a word, but the idea is that, government red tape is always a bad thing and bureaucracy is always a bad thing, and like things like zoning restrict freedom or whatever. But the reason we have zoning laws is to prevent things like this, because the idea is that, you can't build a building capable of handling heavy machinery in a particular area. It has to have particular properties that allows it to, house heavy machinery and allow that machinery to operate.
According to the head of the Bangladesh Fire Service and Civil Defense, the building's 4 upper floors were constructed without a permit. But Jim Yardley of the New York Times reports, quote, Rana's political allies gave him a construction permit, despite his dubious claims of title to the land, and a second permit later to add upper floors that may have destabilized the building, end quote. So I tend to think that the building was permitted and that the Bangladeshi government tried to downplay the administrative failure connected to the collapse by claiming that it was operating illegally.
Yeah, this just goes to show that when you have enough money, laws become just suggestions, really. And I'm sure, Rana greased the right palms, let the right beaks wet themselves, and all the bureaucratic red tape just magically vanishes when you do that. And, it's easy to say that this is strictly a third world problem, but while it's more crude and blatant in the developing world, where, you just go into an office and you give someone a bribe or something, in the developed world, it's the same system of, wealth finding a way around laws that apply to other people, except here we call it political donations to super PACs, and it's for more elaborate schemes of illegal activity.
Yeah, definitely. Moreover, Sohail Rana was a member of Bangladesh's Jubo League, the youth wing of the Awami League, which is currently the leading party in Bangladesh. Rana's money and political connections likely enabled him to skirt the law. The building was inspected a few times, but declared safe. No action seems to have been taken to stop the factory operations.
Yeah, just keep in mind that the Awami League are a center/center-left party. They espouse a mild sort of social democracy coupled with Bengali nationalism stemming from the Bengali War of Independence against, it was part of Pakistan, and the Awami League was part of that sort of resistance to Pakistan that established Bangladesh. But like most center-left parties in the 90s onwards, it sort of shifted right on economic grounds, and it's some sort of like third-way politics that we see with, for example, Blairite Labour and other parties.
Yeah, I'm not going to pretend to be an expert on Bangladeshi politics because I am not, but it definitely seems like the Awami League wants to distance itself from Sohail Rana.
Oh, absolutely.
In April of 2013, about 5,000 people worked in the Rana Plaza factories. They manufactured clothes for companies like Benetton, Bon Marché, Prada, Gucci, Versace, Moncler, The Children's Place, El Corte Inglés, Joe Fresh, Mango, Matalan, Primark, and Walmart. These weren't all made in the same factory within the building, but if you were under the impression that high-end designer brands are manufactured far, far away from Primark and Walmart clothes, they're not. You have Gucci clothes being made right next door to your Primark stuff, so I'm sorry, guys.
Yeah, when you're paying money for Gucci, you're paying for a logo, not for a particular manufacturing process or some sort of, special properties. It's pretty much just the logo.
Yeah, I do have one pair of jeans that were made in the USA, and I bought them partially specifically for that reason, and they were pricey. They are the only clothing item I can think of that I've actually noticed a quality difference.
Yeah, I've seen that with. So I have a couple of T-shirts that are. One of them is made in the US, one of them is made in Canada, and they definitely lasted me a long, long, long time without being like frayed or anything.
Yeah. So on April 23rd, 2013, the day before the collapse, a TV channel records footage showing cracks in the Rana Plaza building. The shops and bank on the lower floors were immediately evacuated and closed. The factories were also evacuated, but Sohel Rana said that the building was safe and workers should return to work the following day. A company called Ether Techs threatened to withhold a month's pay from workers who refused to come to work. The fast fashion industry in particular puts pressure on workers to meet short production deadlines. Meanwhile, to keep costs low, workers are paid miserably low wages, reportedly around 38 euros a month in this factory. Honestly, you'd have to live under a rock to be unaware of the abysmal working conditions in garment factories.
Yeah, this is pretty much the foundation for fast fashion. When you have abhorrent labor conditions and sheer misery in pretty much 75% of the planet, so the remaining 25% can live a life of extremely wasteful luxury. And this is not me, proselytizing or being particularly patronizing. This is just an observation, and it's not limited to garments either. It's the same conditions apply across the spectrum of exports, electronics, shoes. The economic system we live under is such that a minority of the population get to live relatively opulent lives while the rest, toil in misery. And I say this knowing full well that I am part of that minority insofar as, I live a life of privilege in Canada.
Right, and we don't want to be preachy or something. We feel like you all know that the people who make the clothes in H&M and Zara and Forever 21 and places like that are treated like dirt. You have to know that.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's not a secret really.
Right, but we like to turn a blind eye to it because we like our stuff. It's horrible, but it's true.
Yeah, and I think people also, there's a certain limit to how much people can, I don't want to say care, because people can care, but if you're sort of a middle class worker in the developed world, like in Canada or the US, and you go to work every day, 9 to 5, you drive an hour commute there and back, and you have to pick up your kids from school and then after school programs and make dinner and this and that and the other. And, just the toil of modern life is such that it grinds you down so much that you really don't have the mental capacity to think of, factory workers in China needing suicide nets because conditions are so bad that suicide is pretty much an endemic problem there. It's part and parcel of a system that workers here are ground down to dust too, but they still live a life of luxury compared to the rest of the world, but they also the emotions are sapped out of you being a worker here.
Oh, for sure. And I think when we talk about these terms like fully automated luxury communism, to pick on, I guess, one term, any of that doesn't pay attention to things like the environment, in my mind, are not the way we need to be thinking. The fact is, in this better world where people are not treated like shit in factories, you're not going to have 20 different t-shirts. You're going to have 3 and they're going to be nice quality, and that's going to be fine.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Like, it's important to understand that the idea of like owning like 100 t-shirts and like 100 jeans and like buying a smartphone every year because the updates make it such that after a couple of years your smartphone is basically a glitchy freezing brick. It's all relatively very, very, very recent. This is not how most of human history was. If you look at like human history in terms of reading anthropological and sociological studies, most of human history, people had, like you said, like 3 or 4 shirts that they'd wash and they'd wear, and then they'd wash again and they'd wear. But the shirts were such that they could withstand that for a long period of time. The idea of like, wearing something for a very short period of time and then disposing of it is very recent, and it's part and parcel of encouraging people to buy more and more things so that the money trickles up to the people who own factories and own companies.
I think there's also a branch of mostly young people, and I'm not trying to shit on anyone. I mean, good for them for at least trying, but who think that socialism means we're going to have everything we want all of the time. And I think it does mean socialized medicine, as in you can go to the hospital when you want, but we're talking about workers owning the means of production. It's not about you having everything you want all the time.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. I think there needs to be a reckoning among the left, especially the fully automated left, like the one we just mentioned, which is like, again, I don't want to needlessly rip on them, but it is important to understand that part of the socialist project that at least I think is the more pragmatic socialist project, the more fair socialist project, is that people in the developed world, people in the so-called first world, like, Europe, North America, even Japan and South Korea, there's a need to, the quality of life will necessarily not be what it is right now. I'm not saying it's going to plummet, but it's not going to be the luxury we have right now because this is just untenable. This is just way too wasteful.
Well, it's things too, like you will have some people say, maybe from naivete, like, oh, and after the revolution, we'll all fly first class. No, there's not going to be first class because flying on an airplane is so fucking bad for the environment. No one should be taking up the space of 3 people.
Oh, absolutely. And I was telling my girlfriend this. For me, when I say after the revolution, which by the way, there is no after the revolution, it's an ongoing process, really. I think instead of saying, oh, we're all going to fly first class, it's probably going to be more planes will only be used for significantly long distance travel. Whereas things like Toronto to New York or Toronto to Washington, D.C. or whatever, this can easily be serviced by high-speed trains, which are a lot more environmentally friendly and actually a lot more comfortable and fun, too.
Yeah, definitely we have to have a reckoning about what the future will look like. And it has to take into consideration that we cannot have all these luxuries as things are without other people being treated like shit at the workplace and without destroying the environment.
Yeah, exactly. So either we can all live a life of dignity and comfort, but with some limitations, or people in Canada and the US, a small minority of us can live relatively luxurious life while the planet burns in 30 years because this is just way too wasteful.
Also, let's be fucking real. I have more clothes than I need, and yet I still wear this t-shirt and these sweatpants 3 days a week at home.
Oh yeah, I'm looking at my closet and I'm pretty sure there's a certain maybe a handful, 5 or 6 shirts that I wear regularly, and the rest are once every 3 months.
Yeah, I see my friends here and they're like, oh, there's Erin in her college t-shirt and sweatpants. And I'm like, yeah, because this is super fucking comfortable. Leave me alone.
Yeah.
So on the morning of April 24th, 2013, a Thursday, there was a power outage at Rana Plaza and people started the diesel generators on the top floor. Again, these would be heavy shaking machines to power several factories. It's calculated that 3,122 workers were in the building at that time. At 8:57 a.m. in Bangladesh, rush hour, the building collapses. The plaza's upper part is completely leveled. Only the ground floor remains, which had previously been evacuated. 1,134 people were killed in the building collapse, more than half of them women, and many of them children who were in the building's nursery facilities. It was the deadliest structural failure in modern human history, which, as we've already partially discussed, was completely preventable.
Yeah, so what is the definition of a dystopia? Well, for me, a dystopia is a noun, and it's a place where mothers of young children are forced to work 12-hour days for pennies on the dollar, while their kids are kept in nurseries on the workplace premises because such a place has no social welfare net for maternity leave.
Yeah, many people lost multiple family members, as it's not uncommon for families to seek employment at the same factory. Could you imagine losing your wife and kids and your sister and brother all in this factory collapse? Horrible.
Yeah, that's grim.
Around 2,500 people were injured. And again, injured could mean anything from bumped on the head but fully recovered to paralyzed from the neck down.
Yeah, we mentioned this a lot on the podcast. We've mentioned this before with mass shootings and such. But, when you read reports or watch TV reports of something having a low, like an incident having a low death toll and a high injury toll, I don't know, I can't speak for anyone else, but for me, before digging more into these things, initially when I was a kid or when I was younger, I'd think that, this is great. This is a low death toll, high injury means that, people will go to the hospital, they'll be treated, everyone will be fine, it's great, it's fantastic, whatever. But yeah, you're right. Like sometimes, even if the death toll is low, and I'm not saying the Rana Plaza death toll is low, it's incredibly high, but even if the death toll was low, when you have a high injury toll like that, it doesn't necessarily mean that everyone is going to recover well. You can have injuries that can pretty much put you in a coma for the rest of your life. When you look at the death toll alone, that's not the whole picture. People's lives are irrevocably changed by this.
And keep in mind, too, these people are very poor. It's not like they have savings around to support family members with these kinds of health problems.
Yeah, and they certainly don't have the means to get physiotherapy and rehab and the sort of services you'd imagine people would need if they are paraplegic to, achieve some semblance of mobility.
Yeah, absolutely. It took days for search and rescue teams to pull survivors from the rubble. One woman named Reshma was recovered alive after 17 days. The United Nations International Search and Rescue Advisory Group offered assistance in finding survivors, but the Bangladeshi government turned them down. Bangladesh was criticized for this decision, as it appeared to value national pride over rescuing survivors. The Bangladeshi search and rescue teams were not well equipped, and many wore sandals and had no protective equipment.
You know what this reminds me of? When Hurricane Katrina hit the US and Cuba offered the US to send its, international medical brigades to help with the medical emergency in New Orleans, and George Bush was like, thanks, but no thanks.
Right, yeah. I would be absolutely enraged if my family were trapped in there and someone were offering help. I really don't care who it is. And they were just like, nope.
Yeah, it's fucking it's not a time for ego tripping. Leave the ego tripping for later. Just fucking accept the help and bring the people in.
Also, if it's true that the building was legally permitted, but the head of Bangladesh Fire Service and Civil Defense lied and said it wasn't, as we talked about before, this would mark the second time that Bangladesh's government tried to save face following the Rana Plaza collapse. Later, Bangladesh's Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina said that Sohail Rana was not in the Jubo League office bearers list, again trying to distance the party from the incident. Workers responded with massive protests. Garment workers targeted vehicles, commercial buildings, and garment factories. Leftist political parties and the Bangladesh Nationalist Party-led 18-party alliance demanded suspects' arrest and trial and an independent commission to identify vulnerable factories. Sohail Rana and several factory owners were arrested in connection with the collapse.
Yeah, for me, that's a classic limited hangout where you leave Rana to take the fall and, you convict him and you might even sentence him to death. But at the end of the day, these trials should go all the way through the government offices that allow these buildings to exist, essentially. Because this is part and parcel of living in a country where public offices make so little income. Like the people who work in public sector make so little income that bribery becomes a de facto rule of life. This reminds me of Iraq, where the soldiers, the actual on the ground troops, make so little money that bribes are a way of life, essentially. And you can say that this is bad and shouldn't happen and these soldiers should do better. But when you have countries that are so exploited, that are so devastated by colonialism, by neo-colonialism, by a national bourgeoisie, a local bourgeoisie that are so parasitical that they don't even develop their own economy the way the bourgeoisie are supposed to, these things end up, becoming endemic. Every inspector, every desk clerk, all they can think of is, making enough money to make the rent, to pay the bills. And if it means looking the other way and signing a permit for a building that isn't supposed to be there, then, you fingers crossed nothing happens.
Right. And lots of people get jobs, for instance, like being police officers, knowing that they're going to take bribes.
Yeah. Oh, it's not even knowing that you're going to take bribes. It's knowing that it goes up the food chain, right? So like if you take a job as a police officer, the guy who gives you the job, the sergeant or the officer above you, he's going to take a cut of your money. Like you get the job because he's like, okay, I'm going to give you a job as a cop or whatever, as a soldier, a troop. You're now like a corporal. Well, you have to pay to your sergeant, who has to pay to his lieutenant, who has to pay to his captain. And it just goes up the food chain. It's the same with public offices, You got a desk job at, say, the Ministry of Electricity or whatever, and you pay your manager some amount of your cut, basically, in order to keep your job, and they pay above, and so on and so forth.
An MLM, but of cops. What a fucking horror story.
Yeah, this is the dystopia we live in.
So, 18 other factories with structural integrity issues were shut down for inspection, but the NYU Stern Center for Business and Human Rights found that few inspected buildings actually remedied the safety violations. In other words, like nothing happened.
Yeah, it's easy to make inspections. Inspections are worthless, but like actually spending money to fix the issues, now that's money. No one wants to spend money, so there you are.
Right. From Wikipedia, quote, on the 1st of May, during International Workers' Day, thousands of protesting workers paraded through central Dhaka to demand safer working conditions and the death penalty for the owner of Rana Plaza, end quote. Survivors also demanded their pay for the month of April and the following 3 months. Get this, a whopping £97 per person for 4 months' pay.
Yeah, this is very obscure, but this reminded me of a scene from Ocean's 13. There's a scene where, Ocean's 13 is a heist movie, right? Where they have to basically rob a casino. And part of the heist involves going all the way down to Mexico to work in one of the factories that manufactures dice. And, the guy goes in and part of the comedy is the guy goes in with the intention of sabotaging the dice, like making them loaded, basically. And he ends up befriending some of the workers and ends up, putting them unionizing basically for better working conditions. When the news gets back to the rest of the gang that this guy is doing that, they're like, what the fuck do they want? What do the workers want? And he's like, $97,000. They do the math and they're like $97,000 each. This is going to be worth at least $10 million. We don't have that. And the guy is like, no, $97,000 total. All the workers are going to get a handful of dollars, basically.
Right. And it's like, why do they even have to fight for this? You're Gucci and Versace. Just fucking give it to them.
Yeah, if you look at the dividends the fucking CEO gets, or not even the dividends, but just general base salary of these people. I'm sure if you're making £300,000 a year, you could afford to lose a couple of 10,000 or 20,000 or 30,000 to give these people what amounts to £100 for 3 months.
So these protests were often met with pushback from the police.
Yes, and this is your daily reminder that police are class traitors.
Yeah, they're not workers. They're not going to help you.
Yeah.
From Wikipedia, quote, on the 30th of August, 100 days after the collapse of Rana Plaza, injured workers and family members of those who died there, along with workers' rights activists, inaugurated a memorial for the tragedy. A crude statue of 2 fists thrusting towards the sky, grasping a hammer and sickle. The police attempted to stop the erection of the memorial several times. It remains the only memorial monument for the tragedy, end quote. Which, that right there tells me that these workers know the problem and they know what they want.
Yeah, they have class consciousness, which is incredible because I look at workers in Canada and the class consciousness is pretty much dead here. And to see workers there having class consciousness is incredible.
Right. They want to organize for better working conditions. They want like 97 pounds for fuck's sake.
Yeah, and not even like £7 a month. 97 pounds for 3 or 4 months. Like, that is what? Like 20 pounds a month? Fucking give it to them. Fuck.
Right. And it's because they can't work because the factory where they worked has fucking collapsed and killed more than 1,100 people.
Yeah.
Some retailers who manufactured in Rana Plaza, such as Primark, Loblaw, Bon Marché, and El Corte Inglés, agreed to compensate the families of victims with $200 each, but only if they could provide DNA evidence linking them to one of the deceased, which proved very difficult. Seriously, just, again, it's $200. Just give them the fucking money.
Yeah, also, this is interesting because they said DNA of one of the deceased. So if your family member was maimed or made paraplegic or is in a coma but is not dead, do you just not qualify for the $200? Like, really?
Yeah, I'm sure.
Fucking just psychotic.
Also, Walmart, Carrefour, Mango, Ashwan, and Keek have refused to compensate victims. Like, they will not even sign on to this bullshit accord to give them $200.
I mean, in a way, I kind of like find that amusing, not in a sort of ha-ha way, but in a sort of, well, at least they know what side of the class fence they're on. At least these companies recognize that they're in a class war and they're not willing to budge, which is like fair. It just shows who your enemies are.
Yeah, Walmart is extremely anti-union in the United States and obviously in places like Bangladesh. I know there are some people who say Walmart is affordable for low-income people, and it is, that's true. But again, Walmart is not your fucking friend.
Yeah, it's not at all.
So some retailers have pledged to ensure better safety conditions for Bangladeshi workers, but honestly, this means next to nothing. There were laws in place before the collapse that were not followed. Human rights groups have reported that despite more international attention, Bangladeshi garment workers are still at risk, including facing violence from bosses if they try to unionize or gain better conditions. This is far from the only deadly incident in Bangladeshi garment factories. It is a recurring pattern. And I'd just like to point out as well, despite the fact that many clothes are also manufactured in Vietnam, I haven't heard so many stories of factory fires and things like that. And I wonder if it's because the communist government in Vietnam is much stricter about those things.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised because, again, when you look at the COVID-19 pandemic response, Vietnam has what, like a couple of dozen cases, like a handful, like a couple of hundred maybe. And when it hit, they made a very quick decision to shut down the economy to save people's lives, which shows you what that particular government prioritizes.
Right. I would encourage you as well, if you have not heard the Vietnam public service announcement coronavirus song, look it up. Absolute bop. Slaps.
Oh yeah, it slaps. It absolutely slaps.
Politicians in the West reacted to the Rana factory collapse by expressing sadness and encouraging consumers to be conscious of where we spend our money. Which, okay, but how? I agree that thrifting clothes rather than buying new ones is better for the environment and such, but it doesn't stop the oppression of workers in Bangladesh. Individual responsibility as a response to structural problems doesn't work. This is the fault of landowners and corporations.
Yeah, I mean, not to get all Maoist in this podcast, because I do sympathize with some of Maoism, but it's also the fault of the developed countries as nation states, as entities, because these countries allow companies to move their manufacturing to other countries to avoid domestic labor laws. And I don't want to sound too much like a nationalist either, but sometimes I wonder if it's feasible to enact laws such that a company, say Walmart, must adhere to labor laws of the country it's incorporated in, regardless of where the factories are located. So if Walmart's headquarters are in wherever, fucking New York, Delaware, whatever, I don't care, then it has to abide by domestic labor laws of the US and US minimum wage, regardless of where its factories are. And I know this is like, there's a lot to unpack here, and these laws are a whole other conversation. But I think it would be interesting as a start to try that. And I also think that this idea that, you vote with your dollar or whatever is just another way of absolving the state of responsibility for these disasters and placing that responsibility on the individual as a political unit, when individuals really aren't political units. Groups are political units, not individuals.
Well, and also, if you vote with your dollar, I have very few dollars, so naturally I would get less of a say than someone who has a lot of money.
Again, it's a systemic problem. So, like, even if I were to vote with my dollar, like, what are my options in terms of buying clothes that are ethically sourced, ethically made, etc., etc.? I'm not saying there are not anything out there, but like, it's very difficult to find clothes that are A, affordable, and B, fit you, and C, are ethically made. It's very, very difficult because, again, not to sound like we live in a society, but we live in a society. And part of that is knowing that there is no ethical consumption under capitalism, basically. That's what I'm trying to say.
Hassan Minhaj and Patriot Act did a segment on this. It'll be linked in our notes as always, about how ethical clothing and ethical fast fashion is just a giant fucking scam. It means nothing.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
So I'm not saying that we should do nothing. Like, we should definitely do our best to boycott corporations that routinely put their workers in brutal conditions. But real change will take a complete overhaul of workers' rights in Bangladesh. The fact is that fast fashion is terrible for workers and for the environment. We also need a cultural reimagining of fashion if we're going to have a more sustainable and equitable future. So I think the best thing we can do, of course, is to support workers' unions globally and criticize the West's routine abuse of post-colonial states. But we could also buy fewer garments and thrift when possible. Like, yes, some brands are perhaps more ethical in their production process than others, which under capitalism is not very ethical at all. But not purchasing something that you really don't need is probably the surest way to reduce harm.
Yeah, you heard it here first, folks. Erin suggests that we should abandon fast fashion and that all women should wear niqabs and all men should wear dashdashas.
But really, if it's between something that is fast fashion, H&M, and something that is allegedly ethically sourced, actually your best option is to buy neither, if that's possible. So, Sohail Rana and 37 others, including government officials, have been charged with murder and could receive the death penalty if they are found responsible for the complex's collapse. I cannot find any information as to when this trial will happen. The fact that 38 people have been charged shows that this problem reaches beyond individuals. It took dozens of people turning their heads for this to happen.
Yeah, I agree. But also it's important to keep in mind, you don't want to just let these 38 people take the hit without examining these problems from a deeper level via the government and, private landowners and so on.
Right. This is absolutely a widespread structural problem. And Rana Plaza is not the only building that is in danger of collapsing.
Yeah.
I would imagine that at least Sohail Rana is going to be found guilty because articles about him call him the most hated man in Bangladesh and stuff like that. And I understand why people are extremely angry at him. They should be. But I think he's going to be found guilty, put to death, and the government is going to be like, well, we solved that problem.
Yeah, and it's going to suck. But yeah, I mean, and again, like, not to say that this isn't in and of itself a good idea insofar as I have mixed feelings about the death penalty. I think the death penalty is very complicated, but when it comes to Sohail Rana, I'm all for the death penalty.
Yeah, I don't feel bad for Sohail Rana. I'm opposed to the death penalty for reasons outside of individual cases.
Yeah, same, exactly.
But we appreciate you all listening to our little podcast.
Yeah, hope you guys have a great week ahead of you.
Yeah, if you are subscribed to our Patreon as a $10 and up subscriber, you will be getting a bonus episode sometime later this week. If you are not subscribed to our Patreon, you can go ahead and do that at patreon.com/DosCriminal if you're interested. You can also follow us on Instagram at DosCriminalPod. And please review the podcast on Apple Podcasts. It's really the best way to sort of push us up in that algorithm. So when people search for cases that we've covered, we come up first, and then more people will hopefully listen to and discover our podcast.
Yeah, exactly. So, we really appreciate your support. We appreciate the reviews. We appreciate you telling your friends. And your friends telling their friends, and so on and so forth. Much like an MLM, really.
Yep. Have a great week, everyone.
Bye.